Right. I have absolutely no idea if I'm live or not right now. It looks like I am. Right, here we go. Just had a helpful message to let me know that I am indeed live. Right, it's 11 o'clock. I don't think we're going to wait any longer. I'm David Bellamy, founder, CEO of Harken. Well, here to talk about preventing burnout. This is our first ever live stream. I don't know if this is going to work. First thing, I can't control my PowerPoint. There we go. So yeah, this is our first ever live stream. We've obviously done webinars before, and we've done live demos and the like, but never using anything streaming across the internet. So huge potential for stuff to go wrong. Please be patient in case we're doing so. Katie, I know you're watching in the background. If you could use Teams to let me know if anything is going wrong in the background, that would be helpful because I'm a bit blind. Right, preventing burnout, hot topic, something that we're really keen to help with. We have a unique set of capabilities, and I guess that's what we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to cover, 3 parts. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about burnout, what it is. It seems like a decent place to start. We get some definitions, what it is, where it comes from, perhaps how it manifests. Part 2, second part, we'll talk about the challenges associated with preventing burnout. In particular, that sort of how do we move upstream. And then part 3, we're going to talk about solving the problem of getting upstream. So, there are some particular things that we've developed that I think are worth sharing, and we'll talk about that. So unashamedly, we'll be sharing some of our capabilities as we get through. I'm going to say I would like to keep this as interactive as possible, but I can't see any questions or anything on my screen. So this is sort of a first time, and I don't know how we're going to do that. I know we've got some of the team monitoring chat, so please raise anything in the chat area if you can, and yeah, and we'll see if we can pick it up. I'll see if Katie, perhaps watching this again, if you could fire questions to me via Teams if they come up, that would be handy because I don't have any visibility of them. Right, in terms of hopes for the session, and this is quite an important bit too. Look, firstly, my first hope is that this session works properly, right? That's the very first thing that's going through my head right now. But we want to add something to the whole subject of well-being. And if as a result of this session, you go away thinking, okay, well, I've either learned something or I've had my thoughts challenged in terms of the way that my organization is approaching well-being, then I think we're going to consider that a success. There's some different ideas that perhaps we'd love you to take away and really sort of think about embedding. The second objective is going to be a bit challenging because I was going to say I'd love to learn a bit more about what other people are doing. So if you've got ideas, thoughts, if you're doing stuff that we're doing, then I'd love to hear about that because we think we're the only ones. If you're doing stuff that's different, I'd love to hear that too. So again, using the chat functions, let us know. We are, I hope we're recording this session, but if we get to the point where we haven't addressed questions, we'll try and circle around that piece at the end afterwards. Now, and the last thing, of course, from an AIMS perspective, I mentioned this already, super excited to share 2 or 3 of the features that we've got. There's a handful of things that we do that nobody else does. And, we've had a benefit of being on this journey for a long time. We didn't start out trying to solve burnout or any such thing. We started out thinking about how do we fill the gap between periodic surveys and provide a different lens on organizational life, and we worked out along the way we could do some other things, and that was quite interesting. And so as a result of that, we've sort of constantly evolved and developed this product. And if you leave half as excited as I am about some of the things that we do, even maybe a 10% as excited as I am, that'll be a pretty good thing, right? Now, let's crack on. What is burnout? I mean, it's obviously an increasingly common term, isn't it? It has a specific definition. In 2019, World Health Organization redefined burnout. This is, you have to figure, I'm going to read this because it's really difficult language, but it's a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It's categorized by 3 dimensions: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism, I didn't even know that was a word, or cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional efficacy. Burnout refers specifically to phenomena in the occupational context and should not be applied to describe experiences in other areas of life. There's a whole load of interesting stuff in that definition, not least of which, of course, is it's talking exclusively about a workplace phenomenon. It says not to apply it to other areas. I think we typically do. We think about burnout in lots of aspects of our life, and I happen to believe there is a big overlap between home and work, particularly the way we're working right now. But work plays a big part in that, of course. The definition from the World Health Organization comes largely from work that Dr. Christina Maslach has done. She started studying burnout in the 1970s, looking at sort of healthcare in the US. And we'll touch on some of that stuff later on. As she describes it, very similar words, you'll recognize this, but her definition is exhaustion in 3 dimensions. So an exhaustion dimension, wearing out, loss of energy, depletion, debilitation, and fatigue. So again, something we can recognize in ourselves and others, perhaps from time to time. A cynicism dimension, I think this is really interesting. Negative attitudes towards clients, irritability, loss of idealism, and withdrawal from professional obligations. And that sounds a great deal like disengagement, doesn't it? And an inefficiency dimension, reduced productivity, low morale, and an inability to cope. So there's sort of ways that when we use different language like that, I think we can start to see a really good sense of actually how this manifests in our workplace. Now, primary causes of burnout. So there's lots and lots of reasons, but when you think about the stuff that's most commonly studied and where there's strong evidence, 6 stand out. Overwork, not rocket science, that too much to do, unrealistic demands, all those sorts of things are probably top of the list, the most common causes of burnout in people. Perceived lack of control. That's the whole autonomy question. Flexibility. Obviously, there's a version of that, isn't it, that's playing up right now. We're seeing, so, and related to overwork, of course, our inability to say no to people. You know, so one of the responses to burnout, taking a sort of personalized view of it, an individual view of it, is we've just got to get better at saying no to things. And actually, lots of people don't have the option to do that. So, perceived lack of control over our work, how it's done, where it's done, all those sorts of things. High on the list. Lack of reward or recognition, doesn't need explaining. Lack of fairness, things like equity, consistency, transparency have a big impact on us. These are all known stressors as well, by the way. Fairness, recognition, autonomy are all known sort of global stressors. Poor relationships at work. So things like competition in culture, you know, the sharp elbows type stuff, isolation, not having enough people to spend any time with. These are sort of things that, you know, for me, sit in a space where we're worried that maybe the home working thing is going to have a detrimental impact on some people because it will diminish our ability to form relationships at work, particularly if you're at the beginning of your career. I know nobody wants to commute, but and then values mismatch, which, you know, where actually we just have different beliefs, and that's sort of evident in, you know, we don't want to get into a discussion about corporate values or core values or any of those sorts of things, but actually, you know, when we're working for organizations, some people might call this sort of you sort of think moral harm and stuff like that we do, but we're working for organizations where perhaps they're saying one thing and doing another, where we say we care and we don't, or we're doing things that are damaging the environment, or we're doing things that are harmful to society. You know, that's nobody goes to work to work on those things consciously, so they're challenging for us. It's a big deal, isn't it? So challenges. So what's The challenges when it comes to preventing burnout are quite complex, actually. It's hard to spot in others. And there's a whole load of things here. I think there's one way we think about burnout, which is that it's like an explosive event. Burnout is typically not, and this is work-related stress, all related here, same sort of thing, is not typically a big explosive traumatic event. It's a pebble in the shoe. And that's the best way to think about it. It's the accumulation, pebble in the shoe, drip, drip, drip of frustration, of irritations, of things that get in the way of us doing the right thing, of being able to serve customers great, to having a good work experience with colleagues. The final straw. So we think about it in those terms. It's a cumulative thing, and it's and that's one of the reasons that spotting it in others is particularly difficult. Right, so we're thinking about it in one way, and it manifests in us just in sort of gradual disengagement, frustration, too much, just another thing that's not gone right. It isn't about the person, it's about the organization. I think this is one of the most important things for us to understand when it comes to burnout. And Jennifer Moss and Christina Maslach and others talk about this regularly. One of the most common things we hear when we talk to organizations is that they have an app for wellbeing. And I'm going to talk about apps in a moment, but it's a direct reflection of this belief that burnout is about protecting or fixing individuals. And that's probably the wrong way to think about it. And the best way to emphasize this and to demonstrate it is to think about, again, a Maslach analogy that I've used before, the canary in the coal mine. So you picture the canary in the coal mine, and it's sitting in a cage, and it's on its perch, and it's singing when it goes into the mine. And then after a shift inside the mine, it comes out, and it's covered in soot, and it's off its perch, and it needs resuscitating. And nobody thinks about that canary and says, if only it had been a bit more resilient, if only it had practiced a bit more mindfulness, if only it had, that thing we all intuitively and sensibly understand that it's about the workplace. The workplace makes the canary sick. And I think we need to be thinking about burnout in the capacity of the environment, the work conditions, the environment, the things that we're putting people through in that space. And there is an issue with, of course, some people have a propensity to burnout more than others. There's evidence to suggest that. And by the way, they're not the weak people. They're the people who do the most. They're the people who typically put their hands up to get involved in everything. So no surprise there. And they're people who work in particularly challenging jobs. But I think that when we think about the workplace in those terms, it's going to help. But and I do want to talk about wellbeing apps because it relates to the same thing. Now, this is not a knock on wellbeing apps, on wellness services in general, because I think there's a brilliant place where we need to think about them for what they are. Right, so I'm never going to discourage any organization from getting an app that's going to help people to breathe, to meditate, to do all sorts of stuff. Right, but they're not the cure nor the antidote for burnout. Right, they're powerful tools, but they're more about living our best lives. They're about helping humans to flourish and to thrive and to be as good as they could possibly be. Not about helping us to deal with the endless number of stresses that we face in the workplace, right? It's not about our ability to carry more. So they belong in the same category as sort of eating healthily and exercise and sort of good living regimes. But when you think about it in those terms, you cannot out-train or outrun a crappy work environment. You can't be more productive. Well, I might regret saying this, but you can't. Productivity is not going to be dramatically improved for eating more greens, right? There's a whole bunch of things that we need to do that sit outside of this. There's a and one of the things we know, of course, that organizations you're getting out wellness apps in order to demonstrate that you care about your people. That's great. Right? But at the same time, it's actually giving a message that it's about the individual. And this is what also compounds this problem, that it's not okay to, or it's okay to be okay is challenged, isn't it, by the idea that it's a personal thing. It's not a reflection of what you're doing in the organization and how the organization is performing right now. That's a big deal. So we spend a bit of time on that, but I think that matters, right? Next thing, how would you know if you had a burnout problem? I think this is another interesting thing. So quality of data inside organizations, problematic as far as we can see. So is it when people are off sick? Is it high staff turnover? Is it disengagement? Is it declining or lower productivity? Well, firstly, people don't typically tell us when they're off sick with stress or burnout. Sometimes they do, sure, but not, we know that that's an underreported stat because people will phone up with a cold, or I'm under the weather, or, I'm not well in other reasons, so we find reasons to not come to work, and we'll describe it in a different way. Because we're not reporting it in those anyway. We typically don't report these things to HR. We might tell our manager anyway, and that might not be picked up in data. So it's hard to tell in the round whether we have a problem. The next thing about attrition, people typically don't leave, right? What they do is they'll stay, and they'll get disengaged, and they'll gradually check out and do as little as they have to do to survive. And that's the thing that's going on. They start to get into a place where, depleted of resources and exhausted of all those things, I start to think about, well, what if the next place is just as bad as this? At least I know this one. So we end up harming ourselves in lots of ways. And so this is an unreliable metric. We're reliant upon there being alternatives for starters. Disengagement, well, if only we could measure that anyway, right? We know there are lots of people who are cynical and those sorts of things in organizations. That's a great reflection, isn't it? If people aren't prepared to contribute in ways about the organization because they're sort of fed up with nothing changing, great indicators. But disengagement in itself is very hard to measure. There's no reliable measure of it. There's no reliable definition of it. And productivity, again, I'm sounding cynical myself, aren't I? But we have very, very limited metrics for productivity, particularly in knowledge industries, right? So we don't know what a good day's work feels like for most people. That's one of the compounding issues for well-being generally. But it's very hard to know when people are struggling. And there's an example I want to give you, sort of this whole piece where. We've got this, one of our clients, I was talking to one of the directors there and told me a story, which I think was really interesting, which was about a colleague. And then, so they're in the office, they've been in a meeting, and there was a colleague who had been performing normally, as far as they were concerned. He'd been relatively normal. And one of their closest friends in the office had spotted just a little behavioral thing. An unusual behavior, and so waited behind and spoke to this person about, is everything okay? And then that person sort of basically revealed that they were in crisis, and they'd been in crisis for some time. And what was fascinating in the way the story was told to me was that nobody had noticed. This is a high level senior individual with people reporting to them, doing a big job, and nobody had noticed that they were off. And more to the point, he said that person had been in crisis for 3 months and had done very little or none of the work that they were expected to do, but nobody had spotted that either. Nobody had noticed. And that, not about pointing fingers, it's about the complexity of this thing, right? So that thing about understanding what we see and what we can learn and how we pick up the signs, it's got a lot harder when people aren't in the room. But that was a story of somebody senior in a building with colleagues, and nobody noticed that they were in crisis. So and that particular organization is a very good one that cares deeply about its people. So the challenges with getting people to speak up are immense, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. We've got the wrong systems as well for these for picking up this sort of information. So surveys point to systemic type issues. And they're great. Again, they play a role in sort of this concerted long-term cultural effort. So can we reduce the causes of burnout in our system? Great, but you're still left with the challenge of getting ahead of it in the first place, and in particular the individual cases where they occur, because we have to accept that we're all on this continuum, we're all up and down, and what we're trying to do. I think burnout is about stopping people getting into that decline, and it's hard to do that if you're relying purely on measure, pause, whatever it is, and check the world changes, and then you measure it again. It's very hard to isolate what's causing what. There is this perceived lack of safety, and that stops us from speaking up. So psychological safety, of course, is we all know how important it is. Right? But I think that the way I tend to think about this, it's okay not to be okay, is that I don't know how safe you'd have to make your organization before it becomes okay for people to really put their hands up, because it isn't a judgment on the culture at this point. It's unless we're cautious about speaking up, because there are always consequences. I've talked about this regularly, freely, and often. It's one of these things that if I guess the only way I can imagine this ever working is if we only employed people that had never worked anywhere else, because you only have to have had one experience where there are consequences, and there are always going to be consequences. Then you're going to be cautious, right? And I don't think, and I don't think these consequences are any longer the fear of getting fired. Right? I don't think people live in that world anymore. And maybe they do, but certainly in the world that I move in, they don't worry about that. What they do worry about is that there are consequences to the work that they're doing, right? So you will stop being involved in all the stuff that you've been looking forward to doing, all the best bits of your job, the most challenging bits of your job. And if we want to get ahead of burnout and stop it from happening, then we need to acknowledge, I think, at least that until we reach a point where we say, well, okay, I know you're not on your A game right now. You've told me you're struggling, but I'd still like you to go and make that really critical pitch next week, or I'd like you to go and manage this particular project with other people. There's too much protection required, and too many responsibilities to others, I think, for that to be a realistic outcome. So, it's an understandable position that we're in, where you say, if I put my hand up, then some other stuff is going to need to happen. We're going to need to make some changes, which is why we typically wait until we absolutely have to. And I think that we're cautious enough inside organizations, particularly large ones, where it's competitive. It really is competitive. We're reluctant because we might set ourselves back. We're going to try and carry on and all these things. So it just makes it very difficult, right? And I think that the expectation that people are going to raise their hands sooner is a difficult one, unless we can provide some guarantees around their identity and protection, protect their anonymity. The other part of that, I think, about raising our hands, by the way, so we raise our hands in crisis, but we also don't raise our hands for others, do we? And is it our business? Am I sure about that? What would they say? Am I compromising their career? Would they think I've done something to jeopardize them? There's a whole load of reasons why, unless somebody absolutely tells us that they need some help, which we just covered why they don't, that's difficult, right? So anyway, it's a complicated thing, right? So if we want to get ahead of burnout, there are some other things we need to give thought to. So let's talk about that. Approaches to prevention. Empathetic leadership. A lot's written about empathetic leadership right now. There's a lot of stuff that we're all interested in it, I think. Being more in tune with our people, listening intently to what people have got to say, what's going on for them, understanding their context, their lives, their needs. And of course, as part of that, giving them the right environment and the right tools and the like to share open and honest feedback. You've got to be the kind of leader who wants unvarnished truth, unvarnished reality. That isn't all leaders. We know that, right? There are more now. There are certainly more. But empathetic leadership, critical, right? We need to be getting to a position where we're starting to understand other people's perspectives first and trying to do the best. That's the whole point about, I guess, servant leadership, whatever you want to call it, but being about how can I do the job I need to for my people. Well-being as a community-oriented goal. So I touched on the individual versus collective thing before. So we're seeing it as an individual problem, but as a community-oriented goal, it's quite different, isn't it? So if we're asking questions in a leadership capacity, but also as teammates, what is going on in our environment that's promoting burnout? That as a question, and I don't mean literally asking it in a survey. I mean, thinking about that as an overarching question that sort of you spend time thinking about and observing what's going on here that's likely to be causing burnout. And we think about the primary causes, workload, reward recognition, relationships, fairness, autonomy, values. Those sorts of things start to give us a sense of what's, as an organization, are we fulfilling the needs of our people in those respects in order to be as good as we possibly can be? But we also start to think about that team responsibility piece, right? Collective responsibility for well-being. It isn't HR's job. It's not mental health first aiders. And we can't just keep dumping on people, all that sort of stuff. We have to think about our organizations as communities and start to think about well-being and anti-burnout as part of that. Thinking about resilient workplaces over resilient people. Resilience of a system. I think about this. If we think about technology, we think about risk, we think about other ways that we view resilience in organizations. continuity planning, all those sort of things, are versions of resilience. And when we think about resilience in people, it's about how much they can carry. And so when we think about resilient workplaces, I think we might ask the question differently. We might start to explore, our organization's ability to deal with adversity, for example, our ability to protect and prevent those known stresses. Would we be reducing the amount of grit in our shoe if we were thinking more about resilience as a system or a resilient workplace around things like workload? Are we distributing work sensibly, fairly, sustainably? Those sorts of things, which, again, it's not about making the people more resilient to do more work. It's about understanding whether the system is resilient enough to cope with what we're asking of it. That would be a good place to start. And then we come to where Harken comes in, right? So we sort of many things, or several things about it, 4 things that are really cool when it comes to preventing burnout. And I just start with this kind of, what do we do? Well, we help companies to listen by giving their people a voice and a safe way to use them or use it, and a whole lot of smart stuff in the background too. Now, if your brain has taken you, or everything I've said about sort of what we do with, or the way we might find out how people are doing, has got you into a notion of survey company, please try, if you can, to erase all sense of that. Right? We are not a survey company. So I need to replace that image. So if you can have a blank space for a moment, I'm going to replace it with something else. So rather than the way we approach this thing, and again, so context here is we didn't set out to solve burnout. Right, we set out to fill the gap between surveys. Right, so surveys have existed long before us. Back in 2016, when this became an idea that we started working on, in 2017 when we launched, most companies were still using annual surveys. Now, of course, pulse surveys are. Just found out this, the PowerPoint is not working. Brilliant. Katie, can you tell me if I've been chatting away with slides the whole way and not knowing that nobody else could see them. So forgive me. I'm going to see if I can fix this. I'm going to come back to the Harken thing in a minute. Joys of tech. Yeah, that's a good shout. Whoever said that. So share the slides afterwards. Let me just see if I can find. Right. I've just tried to reshare that. Yeah, we can. We will send copies out. Thank you. Can anybody see the screen now? Katie, before I. Yes, working. Okay, great. Thank you. Right. Let me come back to where I was. Right. So I've created a blank space in your mind with erasing all notions and ideas of surveys. We'll send the slides out afterwards. They're only bullets, but I've listed a whole bunch of things that I didn't realize anybody could see. Forgive me for that. Told you there was going to be some issues. Instead, what we did was, rather than asking people periodic questions about how they feel about aspects of work, again, which has its place. This is not a judgment on that. We decided to take a different route. We wanted to create a greater sense of reality inside organizations. So we set out with an idea to collect, so I guess it's that sort of, what's it like inside our firms in real life all the time, rather than just a moment in time. And we use a check-in routine to do that. And we collect 2 bits of data, 2 bits of information. One, how do you feel, using a 0 to 100 scale? And 2, why do you feel that way, in a sort of free form, not in a sort of, in a free form narrative, or in the form of a free form narrative. Now, we use the numerical data, so that rating, right, 0 to 100, which we normalize. The system will normalize for different people, to give us a live sense, a live picture of morale, sentiment, and mood in groups and individuals, which is great, right? Because as a manager, understanding morale in my people right now, today, this week, this month, really matters. Right? What's going on for my people is a good sense of a sort of overarching sense of systemic impact. So how are generally things going on? And that's going to take into account things like home life and other pressures that people are under, for sure. But it helps us understand the level of resources available to our people. The second part we use the system, the data for, is equally important and maybe a little bit more interesting as well. And it's quite clever. So when everybody checks it, the system is, so this check-in routine, you've got the sort of 0 to 100 rating, and the system is going to check that every single rating as it happens live in the background and say, okay, is what's just happened for that user normal for that user? Right? Is this rating normal for this person? Is anything happening here that we should be alerting to? And if it isn't normal for that person, for whatever reason, there are a whole host of different reasons that we would consider something to be not normal, but it's looking for signs of decline or distress, the system is going to generate a little flag, which is going to turn into a case in our case management tool. Now, I'm going to come back to that, but we're using a whole bunch of different algorithms that are looking for patterns in data that are suggesting somebody might be showing signs of distress or decline, as I've said. Now, that comes from, I want to share a story because it comes from something that happened way back in our journey when, there was it's a particular story that I tell many, many times, but it's quite important to us. And sorry, I was sort of picking up my question there that came up. Apparently some people in the waiting room, I don't know what that means. So I don't think I can do with that. Rating. So we have a comment one day from a client just saying that we have a comment on the wall, which is the sort of the narrative bit, which I'm going to come to in a second, that was quite worrying. Can we look at it? And basically what happens is there's a comment with a comment that says, I'm struggling, or I'm worried about the future. I can't afford to pay for the funeral, let alone get my family to it. I guess my mother could have picked a better month to die, which is obviously very sad to see. It had a very low rating with it. And back then we had to go back and do a little bit of trawling through data to find out, what was happening with this particular person. And we realized at this point, looking back at data that we could pull, that actually here was an unremarkable person in data terms. Right, this is the so they were a positive person, as far as we could see, sort of rated most days between 60 and 70, and then mother's ill health kicks in. So first comment associated with ill health sees the ratings drop into the 50s, and then a week or so later, the company changes the way it did shift allocation, which created uncertainty and a bunch of issues with quite a broad impact. But here it had a compounding impact. And so what we could then see was this individual takes a drop into the 40s with the first mention of sort of concern about shifts and the amount of income. And that was basically then what we see in over the next 4 weeks, a straight line decline, 40s, 30s, 20s, teens, single figures, and vacillating comments between financial insecurity, ill health at home, so worries at home, culminating at the end, with this lady's mother dying at the end. What was the reason we tell the story? Because it was a really pivotal moment for us in terms of understanding, firstly, that perhaps there was more to our data than we had, but we realized we could see that decline in a single person in data, and it was straight line, and we could see it happening. We were looking backwards at it, but it was back in 2019 that happened, and we then worked out, actually, this is the thing we need to solve. We need to get ahead of that. How can we, if we can see that backwards, what point could we have seen that and done something with it? And that meant we had to work out how to display that sort of data in a sensible fashion, in a respectful and private way, but also how could we learn about the data pattern sufficiently that we could get people in front of that issue. And that's what we did, right? So and that was something we launched last year. It took us a little while, but the with that very same case, we would have seen that inside the first 2 weeks now. So we wouldn't have waited 6 weeks. It would have been an opportunity for a conversation way sooner. I think that's the point of it. Now, so I talked about the sort of freeform narrative being part of what we're offering here too. So it's the freeform narrative is helpful in this life inside our firm too, when it comes to this whole burnout, well-being, stress, life inside our work, unvarnished feedback. And I mentioned it before. So live, real time, what people are experiencing. It's going to give you views and feedback as the leader, and it's transparent, so we're going to make it available to everybody, but it's that sense of the challenges facing people. If you have issues with overwork, and some people do, it's not an organization-wide thing that we see in lots of places, but we see some people struggling with workload, and they'll talk about it. And we see things like isolation, and we things like lack of support, and those challenges. And this is not, this is not a list of all the problems in your workplace. It includes a list of all the things that are wrong with your workplace. It's a picture of life inside your organization, all the good things too. But all of those systemic issues that we've referred to so far that are causing burnout are visible in this freeform narrative, and it's really powerful. Now, the first part of the sort of community and collective responsibility kicks in at that point, right? So when people share stuff, and we know that because it's anonymous and it's safe, and it really is safe, because it's anonymous and safe, people tend to share stuff that they otherwise wouldn't. Right? Sometimes that's a cry for help. Sometimes it's a bit of blunt feedback. Sometimes it's just people saying, look, do you know what? I'm really struggling. I can't motivate myself. I've run out of energy. I've got too much to do and I've got no space and all that sort of stuff. And then you share that anonymously, and one of your colleagues just sends you a bit of love or a little bit of support. It might seem small. It matters, right? It stops that sort of sense of isolation, of loneliness, of not mattering, and we see this all the time. Natural, not forced. Nobody's making anybody do this stuff. It's a very natural thing to do with our colleagues, to care about them. And so this interactive piece, the first level, reactions and replies that we use on the wall, is so powerful. The second part of this community responsibility, or the collective thing, comes from flags. So I talked before about not wanting to put my hand up for others or put other people's hands up for them. We found a way to tackle that too. So people will, sharing comments. And if I'm looking through the wall at comments that my colleagues are sharing, and I see something that is concerning, worries me about somebody who is suffering from too much work, or they've got some stuff going on, I can put up a flag. Right? And I'm not revealing anything about my own identity in doing so. Nobody knows I've done it. And I'm not revealing anything about their identity when I do it, so nobody knows it's that person. It just creates a case. Now, that's that piece I referred to earlier. So the algorithms do the same thing. They create a case. Now, we've built, we call it our wellbeing center, but that's it's a case management tool around this sort of individuals showing signs of distress, right? And when a case is created, so the system creates them, people create them. What a case is basically, just as you can imagine, it's a little package of data, right? It's anonymous data, so it just tells us a little bit about this person, a data subject, if you like. An anonymous package of data about an unknown person. What it shows us is stuff like life on the system as far as they show. So the sort of stuff they're entering, where they've shared it publicly, their trend data, so their ratings, how they're looking, so that whole picture of, is this basically, can I answer the question, is this person really struggling? Are they showing signs of decline? Is this a blip? Is there something happening that's contextually important to understand? And the long and short of all this, I'm enabling wellbeing agents or HR people, whoever it is, but there's a privileged accounts in our platform. I'm enabling them to do something with that information. And at the end of all that, so you get past the sort of things that you can do in sort of conversations and risk evaluation, and you say, do I want to reach out to this person and have a conversation? And this is one of the cleverest things we built, right? Which is, it's like a WhatsApp chat. So I want to send, so I'm working in HR, and I've got this case, and I'm looking at somebody who's clearly struggling, and their ratings are gradually declining, and they're showing signs of disengagement or disenfranchisement or with burnout in any capacity. And I want to reach out. And I can send them a message inside Hark, and it's like a WhatsApp chat. Only one person is known in the conversation. So I would send a message, and the other person will receive a note from David in HR saying something like, I don't know who you are, Harkin's flagged this thing. looks like you might be struggling. Would you like a conversation? Or here are some resources. There are umpteen ways that we might approach that conversation. By the way, when you reply, you remain anonymous. Right, so you have this WhatsApp type conversation inside the system where one person is anonymous and the other person is known. That is a super way to start conversations sooner about the things that are bothering us in our lives and our workplace. And that leads us on to the sort of the final piece of this sort of how do we put up our hands, or how we can sort of see this stuff early. And it's the latest feature we created. We only released this just last week. And it's enabled by that messaging feature. It is, I want to raise my own hand. Right, so we have a little hand icon that floats around the platform now where I want to talk to somebody. Right, and when you do that, you're creating a case about yourself. What we're hoping to happen with this particular thing is that when we say it's not, it's okay to not be okay, well, we can help you mean it, right? Because you don't have to reveal your identity at any point. So I can put my hand up, I can share a few words about what's going on. It's going to create a case about myself and invite a conversation with somebody. So now, I can share some context or I can wait. And one of my colleagues in the organization will send me a message knowing that Harken is going to protect me in this conversation, so nobody will know who I am unless I choose to tell them my name. Now that, I think, is a really important thing. So then what? I should have skipped slides and carried on with this in case management tool, private message, and raising my own hand. And so this sort of point about something, when we're summarizing the way that Harken, where we've built features in here to help address burnout, so with this unvarnished reality helps us get a sense of what's really going on inside our organization. So we're looking for the right sorts of things, an ongoing daily sense of reality inside our firms, giving people voice, giving people an opportunity to share feedback safely about the things that they're experiencing, but also not always feedback, just context, just things that I'm experiencing. We can see and pick up tone. And people are brilliant at describing, the fact that they have got too much to do and too little time or too much pressure, whatever it is, you'll see it. The community-based supports, we touched on those things, actually, just connecting people. We're working less and less together, but the ability to just feel connected to people. And I always go back, so this is way, way before we had any of these cool features. We did a piece of work with sort of a pilot project with a government agency, and part of that government agency had people out digging rivers and driving tractors and lorries and stuff, and a bunch of people in the office, right? And we thought that the people in the office were going to be the super engaged ones, and the people outside were, would find this a bit of a gimmick. And it was kind of the other way around, actually. What happened? The people outside felt like they suddenly were involved in something that mattered, and they were part of something, and they could be connected to their colleagues. And that's a silly example, but I think the strength of community stuff around these anonymous conversations, the ability to interact and to, as I say, just connect, is super important. And I think that matters. And putting my own hand up and speaking up makes a huge difference, so I'm using my voice in a different bunch of ways, aren't I? So through my check-in routine, but also my ability to sort of flag things or flag myself gives us a chance of getting at stuff sooner, and that's the objective here. And alongside that, using the technology where the technology can do stuff that we can't, in terms of analyzing data quickly and rigorously and safely and all that sort of stuff, to spot the signs in people. So looking and trawling data and patterns all the time to say, is there something happening here? And just then the last piece, which I think matters, and when we think about other ways that we might approach this, the answer to these things is not to connect people to content. It's about connecting people with other human beings to help solve these challenges. Right? That, I think, is the way we think it should be done. Yes, great content is out there, but no number of, I've said it before, no number of cat videos or breathing exercises are going to resolve these issues. What we need to do is use the technology as we can to provide the safety, to provide the environment where people can be open, to help monitor things for us in a way that we can't, and then to direct people to the information that they need to have in order to make a difference. That's really where Harken helps. Now, I think I'm going to try and end the slideshow. If I can do that, I don't know if I've got any sense of chat or anything in. Found a chat. Yay! I just found a chat stream. So some people missed the beginning. So right, yeah, we've had people missing for the whole thing. I think we'll send a. I think Katie's in the chat. I've just found out how that works. 45 minutes in. Does anybody have any questions about what I've shared? I have no idea how many people we've had in the room. Any questions or observations about the stuff that we've talked about? I put the chats in the comment and a comment in the display, I think. Okay. Right, that was a first attempt at a live stream. I've got no idea knowing whether that was successful or not. Please let us know. And if you can, so slides that we showed that you didn't see because I was not sharing them properly, obviously was part of the problem, I think. But if you have any, if you'd like to see them, please email me, David at Harkin. That's it. I think we'll end the stream now. Thank you for joining.